This strange object you see to my right is the rarest of rare vehicles. It's the first Porsche ever made. It's called the Type 64. Now, most Porsche geeks like me think that the Pre-A 356, a Gemund 356, is the earliest Porsche, but this car predates that by 10 years. This was Ferdinand Porsche's experiment at a sports car based on the Volkswagen, the people's car, and it was built in 1939. It's still privately owned, and I'm going to get to drive it. I have to say, this might be one of the best days of my motoring life. First things first, even though it was built in 1939, before the Porsche Motor Company had even been formed, it still looks like a Porsche. It's recognisably a Porsche. The crazy streamlined shape, I know, is outrageous because it was built for road rallies, but it just looks like a Porsche. The angle of that VW headlight, the way it's recessed into that wing, I mean, that's the iconography of the next 50, 60 years of Porsche product. It's amazing to see it. And this was basically the Porsche family testbed for its dream of making a sports car on humble beginnings. I mean, I just think it's amazing. It's a piece of rolling history. Come down the side here, wheel spats. So this thing was running, and still is running, a 1 litre flat 4. So basically a very early Beetle engine, 32 horsepower, claimed top speed is still, wait for it, 88 miles an hour. I mean, it is a bar of soap, isn't it? So when they restored this car a few years ago, they took it apart and they found some interesting things. First of all, the assumption was it was just sitting on a Volkswagen chassis. It's not. It's an entirely different construction of chassis using aerospace grade materials. And also the body is riveted in place using 2,000 rivets. Basically, it's Hungarian aircraft technology. It's a plane on wheels. Move down the side here. You can see the thinking, can't you? This is already Porsche saying, rather than going for big capacity, heaviness, let's use brute force, this is lightweight, it's dainty, it's acknowledging the fact that resources are tight, let's use small amounts of power, small engines, existing componentry to go fast. And I just think it's absolutely stunning. And this car is so beautifully patinated. It was black, all the original photographs of it being black. Apparently it was painted in the 1950s. So I suppose it should say this colour, shouldn't it? Because that's what it is. That's this part of its journey. It did the Enstall Classic, I think, in the 90s, and it's done a couple of Goodwood Festival Speeds, but it hasn't been out regularly. It was, bizarrely, refused entry into the Mille Miglia. I mean, can you think of a more Mille Miglia eligible car than this? Maybe they didn't understand its history. If you ask me, this is the most pucker thing that could ever enter that event. Right, come around the back here. This is the stuff I love. So in here, and I say this with my sort of grave voice on, this is the beginning of Porsche. All you people that love 911s, all you people that love Caymans and Boxers and what have you, this is where it all started. 1939, okay. In there is a Beetle engine sitting behind the rear axle, so it allowed plenty of space, and the weight distribution's a bit odd for handling, but of course it's perfect to keep a small frontal area for aerodynamics. And that is the reason why your 911 looks the way it does. Tiny little engine. I mean, the thing weighs nothing. It's beautiful. And it's ragged as well. I mean, this is not an over-restored classic. This is a proper piece of history. It's a ruffled, hammered Chesterfield sofa of a car. Anyhow, let's go around the side, have a look in the cabin, and then you'll realise that I've actually had enough of looking at it. I want to drive it, but wow. Here we go. Look at this. So, it's got sort of semi-perished nylon supported rubbers on the windows that look perfect. All of the chrome work around the seals here. There's so much more attention to making an aerodynamic seal, to making it smooth, than a car of this era. It's just a streamliner. And then you move in here, you've got a seat that sits on a flat floor. The driving position is utterly bizarre because you've got, your legs are pushed to the right hugely because the fuel tank's down there, so that's canting your legs to the right. The throttle pedal is a wheel, a rotating wheel that allows you to push further forwards, obviously without your foot getting stuck on the pedal itself. And I'm shunted literally with my special bits right onto the steering wheel because there's a battery behind me. So you can see the driver's seat is about half a foot further forward than the passenger seat. And these seats are just, yeah, they're old Volkswagen seats that have taken an absolute beating. And straight away, there's familiar Volkswagen. There's a Volkswagen speedometer here, VW logo. All of this is Volkswagen. Gear levers, Volkswagen. It's a rolling test bed for a company that would go on to become one of the most famous car companies. In fact, one of the most famous companies, regardless of whether they make cars or whatever product they make, in the world. This is where it started. This is like breaking into a safe somewhere in America. Someone finds an old safe in a building and you crack it open and you find a little book that says, this is the recipe for Coca-Cola. That's what this is, in a car. That's why I'm excited. You're thinking he's about to drive a right old Sonata that looks a bit like a Beetle, but the reality is, it's a bit of Indiana Jones about this. It's amazing. Not sure about the driving position. Let's go. Good God, if that's the clutch. It's got no weightings on it at all. Just think who sat in this car. Ferdinand Porsche, Ferry Porsche. But this car was built in 1939 and it never really went on and did much because all resources were put towards the German war effort, towards the Kubelwagens, you know, towards the sort of semi-amphibious and small vehicles they needed to move around. That's what Porsche ended up doing. But this thing lurked around. It didn't get destroyed. There were two others, one of which was destroyed during the war, and the other one apparently was effectively captured by the Allied invaders, by the Americans. They chopped the roof off it and hooned it around an airfield, and it seized the engine, and that died. So this is the last surviving one. But there's a thought for contemplation. Yeah, some quite important historical figures have probably sat in this car, and that is, it makes it so much more special. I have to say I'm a little bit lacking in words because I've never been in a car that feels quite as significant as this. Hand beaten, everything. Wow. Let's go for a drive. Let's go for a drive. Oh, wow. Wow. So what's it like to drive? I have to say, I'm completely befuddled because it's so special. So, immediately feels light and agile and much, much pokier than 32 horsepower would ever let you think. I mean, this should be like a 2CV, but it's miles quicker. Raucous noise, no sound ending. I mean, the engine is, I can see the engine from where I'm sitting. I can feel it, I can smell it. Throttle response is great. It feels like a very old little Porsche. Oh, wow. Brakes, yeah, it's got some brakes. They're not necessarily my friend at the moment. Gear linkage is pretty good. Steering with a thin tyre and this lovely thin steering wheel is delicious. Just wriggles about in my hands. Do I look like a happy boy? Oh. I think if you love Porsche, if you love its approach to motor vehicles, you can't fail to be totally captivated by this machine because the DNA is here. This is the genesis, this is where it began, and it feels like it did as well. There's a lot of conjecture about whether it's a real Porsche or not. Well, the chassis is different enough to a Volkswagen to mean, to me, that it's a Porsche, and its place in the Porsche narrative is absolutely beyond reproach, isn't it? There'll be those that say it's not a real Porsche, that a Brie Gemund Austrian-built 356 is the first true Porsche, but this is where it began. This is where the thinking began. And you can't underestimate that, because the beginning of a car company is arguably where it started in the head of the founder, surely. Good Lord, I would love to do a long journey in this. It feels sprightly, you know. It feels like it wants to get up and go, it wants to be moving. Lack of mass is gorgeous. No real sense of the weight distribution either, because the engine is so small and light. Be balanced out by a tank of fuel anyway. Oh, take me home. I had the money, it would have to be in the shed, and whoever didn't let it into the Mille blimey, just nibbles away at the surface, and it feels so on its toes. If it wasn't worth north of 10 million quid, I'd try and skid it about, but that would be rude. But before this film ends, just sit back and look at some more amazing details of this piece of history.